It's time to stitch the first two stuffies of our nativity set. I will be stitching out the baby Jesus in the manger, Mary, the donkey, and then the sheep. The baby Jesus in a manger is on page 5. I have my fabric that has been backed with fusible interfacing on the back, all except for the pieces for the envelope backing, and I have the felt. And also, as a reminder, I am doing 2 sets, and so I have double the amount of fabric. I will keep 1 set put aside, and I will use the scan and cut to cut my applique pieces. And then also I have my skin fabric that I have not cut to size. I will just use it from the strip and then put it aside for the next time I need it. And the reason I chose these 4 to start with is that I will be using my 5x7 hoop, and I have my stabilizer still attached to the roll so that I can save as I work on these 4 projects. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, of course, choose embroidery and go to my USB. And since I'm on a new project, I like to mention that when I put a USB into my machine, no matter what it is, I always plug it into this little pigtail cord. This cord always is plugged into the side of my machine, and I never take that out. That way, when I am plugging and unplugging USBs in and out, I'm not getting more wear and tear on the port and my machine. So if for some reason something goes wrong plugging, USBs in and out of this, I just have to replace, a $5 cord versus something much more expensive on my machine. And that's just what I've always done since I've had my machine. So I've opened my USB, and I am going to bring in the baby Jesus in a manger. And I am stitching these one at a time. I'm not combining these 4. They won't, more than one won't fit into a hoop, but I'm going to show you why I'm leaving the stabilizer attached. So once I've chosen, I will hit set, and I do need to change my hoop size. I am going again to my 5x7. I'll select OK. And normally you would just stitch this out and be done and, rehoop for the next project. However, what I'm going to do after I hit embroidery, I am going to go to layout and move, and I am going to move this all the way to the top. It's not a whole lot. However, because I still have my roll of stabilizer still attached, I will be saving quite a bit of stabilizer. And I just think that anything you can save is just, great, and you can use it for other things. So I have moved it all the way to the top. I am going to select OK, and then I like to stitch on the minus plus needle. I like to stitch on this screen, so if I need to go forward or backward steps or stitches, I'm just ready to go. All right, so let's start with the placement line for the little manger. Now I will place the base fabric. I have sprayed it with a little bit of spray adhesive. I will place it over the placement lines and tack it down. Now it's going to do the placement line for the swaddling A piece of fabric. And this is fabric. It looks like it's just white, but it actually has little tiny polka dots on it. This is the larger of the 2 little pieces, and so I just need to cover up that placement stitch. And I do have a little bit of spray, and then it's going to tack it down. Once it's tacked down, I will trim. After trimming, it's going to run the placement for the little swaddling bee, and that fabric is the smaller of the two and it has the swirls. So I will tack that, I will run the placement, tack it down, and then trim that piece. It just ran the placement for the little head, and so now I'm just taking my strip of skin color and I am going to just place it over. I'm going to tack it down and trim it. So I'm going to trim this little piece of skin for the little baby's head. And again, I just have this attached. I'll put this aside to use for the next person. So before I go on with the manger, I want to make a reminder that when you start a new project, or maybe even every time you turn on your machine, to check your embroidery foot. So I was having some issues and I broke 2 needles while I was stitching the baby's head. And I couldn't figure it out. I've, not had any problems, and I just happened to touch this and it was just completely wobbly. I mean, completely loose. And so I tightened it up. So this is just a reminder to at least maybe the start of every project, at least check your foot to make sure it's tight, because now this is tight. So anyways, that's just a public service announcement. All right, so I've done the placement for the manger, and now I'm going to use my felt. And again, I don't have this cut to size. I did not cut it to the size that the directions call for. I normally don't do that with embellishments. I consider this an embellishment. So I am just going to take the corner and just make sure I have it covering all of the placement lines. Now this will have a little bit of a decorative stitch, but we will treat this like an applique. I will tack it down and trim it, and then it will do the decorative stitch. Now the next set of instructions are for the little fringe so that it looks like hay in the manger. And there's 2 things that it's saying to do. First is to either change the bobbin to a water soluble thread, the bobbin, or to use a visible color. Now I have done several projects that have fringe, and I was not successful using a visible color because you're supposed to cut only the bobbin thread, and that's why they want it visible. And it just did not work for me. So I use the water soluble bobbin. I always mark it. I have my bobbin marked. It's just with a Sharpie, and so depending on how often I use it, I have to remark it. But when I use this, even if I've used it and I have to use it again in the same project or even the same hooping, I take this bobbin out and I put it at least back in the little bag so that there's no mistaking, because if you look at it, it just looks like white thread. Now, I live in a dry climate, so that probably would not be an issue if, I used a water-soluble bobbin and I didn't have a project to get wet. But maybe if you live in a really humid climate, maybe that would be an issue. It might, start to disintegrate. I do, even though I live, again, in a dry state, I keep mine in a little Ziploc bag. So I will change this for this next step. Now, it also says to adjust the jump stitch cutter on your machine to a longer stitch length. I don't know what that means. I've looked through all of my settings on my machine and I can't see anything that can adjust the jump stitch cutter. So I'm not going to do anything. I've done fringe before, granted not, this exact one. So I'm going to see if all is well without doing that. They do highlight it, so I think it's probably important, but I can't find a setting on my machine. All right, so let's try this. Again, I'm putting my water soluble bobbin in right now to stitch this first step. So I stitched out the little hay. I've put my water soluble bobbin back in the bag so there's no mistaking it, and I put my regular bobbin back. I didn't have any issues, and so this is just a super, you can see how big this satin stitch is, and it's irregular because when we dissolve this bobbin, it's going to come loose and be loopy fringe to look like hay. So I'm thinking that maybe if your machine might think that those long stitches need to be cut, maybe they think it's a big jump stitch, and so that's why they suggested making it even longer so your machine wouldn't interpret this that it needs to be cut. That's the only thing I can think of. I am on a Brother Stellaire. I am still using just the one. I haven't upgraded this to, the two. So I'm just stitching on the basic Stellaire, which, by the way, I love. And so maybe if I were to upgrade, that setting might be available. I'm not really sure, but I didn't have an issue. And so again, I put my regular bobbin back in. And this is super important because now we need to tack this down, because if we were to get this wet, this whole entire thread would just come off your project. So now it's going to do a tiny satin stitch, of course, with the regular bobbin to anchor this so that it will be at the top, so that when we dissolve it, the fringe will be fringy and look like hay, but all the tops will be anchored down. So it's very important to put your regular bobbin back in. All right, so let's tack this down. So here is a look at the little tiny satin stitch, and that is, again, holding down all of this fringe that we're going to finish in just a minute. Now, the directions say to go ahead and dissolve or cut if you used a visible regular bobbin, and then to come back and do these little placement lines for the backing. I just went ahead and just did those before I took it out. And now we need to dissolve that bobbin thread. Now, if this was a regular block that wasn't going to be turned inside out with the backing, you would just wait until the block is completely done and out of the hoop. But because it's going to have a backing and be flipped inside out and stuffed, it's just easier to do right now. So just turn to the back. I'm going to put a little bit, a little towel underneath. And, this is why I say to invest in a, I don't know, $7 spool of thread for the water soluble, because even though I have white and I can see a tiny bit of the white, maybe it would show better if I had black, but I've tried it both ways. I think I even tried it with red bobbin once. You need to try to cut that bobbin thread without cutting the fringe. Now you could cut the yellow, but then you're not going to get loopy fringe. You're just going to get regular thread that just looks like it's cut off. And I think the fun thing about looking at the front of this little manger is it's just loopy and looks like hay. Anyways, now I just need to soak this bobbin, and it works pretty fast. Usually I'll do a couple of times with water to let it start dissolving. And then I'll pull usually a seam ripper. Just be careful, of course you don't want to cut it, but you can start lifting it. Now you don't want to lift so much that you're going to move your stabilizer. You need to keep, of course, your stabilizer where it is, because we have a couple more steps. But you can see that I can just lift because the bobbin has, dissolved, and I have these loops. And they're not just cut straight off. And I think that's such a great look. Now, if you don't want to use this because you might cut it, I think I'm going to get a little bit more while I get something different. If you don't want to use a seam ripper, because, there is a chance you might cut your thread. I have this cute little kind of spatula. It has a little tiny end. It's, it's not super sharp. And so I can just pull up, kind of go under, kind of wiggle, and it will pull up that thread. And if you just make sure you do it, gentle. If you need to add more water, then you can do that. But you see how easy this is. If anyone saw my Candy Cane Lane bench pillow, I had some fringe that were on two little wreaths on the first and last block of that little pillow. And so it was the first time I had ever done fringe, and I didn't have any water soluble bobbin or thread to make a bobbin. And so I thought, well, how hard could it be if I just do like a black bobbin or a red bobbin? Surely I could see it. And I had this little tiny, probably smaller than the head, just a little tiny wreath that I needed to cut. And so the directions, at least for that one, were to cut only the bobbin, because you want this, kind of the whole point of this fringe is that you can see that it's got loops. It's not just doesn't look like someone just cut the ends. And so if you just cut through the backing of this with, say, a seam ripper, you're going to have just chopped off ends, which I guess that would be fine too, but I wanted it to look loopy. And so I was trying to do this little wreath that, again, was about as big as his head. And from, say, 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, a little quarter of that circle took me 30 minutes to try to get that bobbin cut without cutting the thread and making this fringe. And so I said, nope. I stopped what I was doing. I went down to my local quilt store and bought my water soluble thread. And it was the best investment. I've used it quite a few times for flowers and now for this, and it is so worth it. So now if you look at this, it's just damp. It's, you know, not wet. It's cute little loops. It's 3D, and it just, you know, looks like little hay coming out of the manger. I love it. All right, so I'm going to set this aside to dry for just a little bit while I finish the backing. So here are my two backing pieces. Again, these are the pieces that do not have fusible interfacing on the back. And I need to press one end on each side. This is a little bit wider than it is tall, and so I need to press the longer side. And it says just to press down 1/4 of an inch. And then press again, folding over 1/4 of an inch. So there are 2 folds, and that gives it a nice folded edge that will be part of the envelope backing. Now it says to do it to both sides. I've done the envelope backing where I only do one side and make sure that that is put down first, and then when you flip it, the one that doesn't have the fold is inside and you don't really need the fold. I'm going to try that just so that there's less bulk. If I think it would be better to go ahead and do that from now on, I will fold both pieces. This time I am going to just fold one piece, but it's very important how I place this on the backing. I'm ready to stitch the backing on, and I am going to take the folded piece and line it up with these 2 placement lines that it stitched, making sure that all of the placement lines around are also covered. And then I am going to tape, and they do suggest taping the fold, and we'll just have to rip the tape you know, from the stitching, because we don't want the foot to get caught under that fold. And then I think I'll add, just for good measure, just a piece down towards the bottom, just to keep that in line. So now it's going to do the tack down for this first half. Look, here is a piece of my broken needle that I just saw. It must have been hiding under. All right, let me get that out and continue. After tacking that down, it did 2 more placement lines, and because I have my linen thread back in, you know, I can see them good, but they're right here. And this is just to line up the second piece. Now, again, the directions do call for this to be folded, so you would line the fold up with those placements. I am not going to do that, and again, see how it works so that I don't have quite so much bulk. But if I think that from here on out it might be better to do that, I will do that. But for this first one, I am not going to. I am going to take this tape off. You know what? I think I'm just going to iron it. Just, you can see it's fraying. I don't really think that would be that big of a deal, but maybe I should do what the directions say. It's probably always a good thing. So I'll fold it once and then fold it again. And then I'll again line the fold up with these 2 placement lines. Just making sure that I cover everything else. I am going to just tape again so that the foot doesn't catch under that fold. And then I think I'll just add one to the top now, and then it will do the final tack down. So I have both pieces of that envelope backing tacked down. And now this is done and I can take it out of the hoop. And I want to note that you can see where my hoop ended, and my stabilizer probably would have been cut here. So that's probably a good 5 inches that I can use towards the next hooping. So I am going to leave this attached, and then we'll work on flipping that and finishing that later. So I'm going to get it pretty close. Now I can even put this over the hoop. I might have to adjust my hoop because now I have extra material. So I'm going to loosen it just like 1 turn. And I am going to rehoop. Making sure that it's down. And so now I'm ready to do the next little, I think I'm going to do Mary next. And this will just save on stabilizer. Totally not necessary. Most people don't do this, but that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back in. But if you're doing hooping this way, it's super important that you don't let this get flipped under and then you stitch and ruin what you just did. So always make sure that this is completely out flat. I'm going to put my hoop in, pull some slack so that, you know, nothing gets messed up when it's stitching. So now when I come back, I'm finished embroidering. I'm going to go home. So I'll go to embroidery and to my USB, and I will select Mary and hit set. Now she's right in that hoop and there's no room to move her up. So I'm just going to leave her. I'll select embroidery and go to my minus plus needle and then start stitching the placement. Mary is on page 11. I have all of the fabrics backed with interfacing on the back except for the pieces for the envelope backing, and I have the turquoise felt. So let's go stitch Mary. Before I start stitching out Mary, I do want to make one note that in the directions, the baby Jesus in the manger is the very first project to be stitched. And if you've ever done a Kimberbell project, you'll note that this is exactly as they have directions for their other projects. Every step has a picture and it's very helpful. Most of the time, honestly, I look at the picture versus reading the actual directions. Of course, they do list the color of thread, and again, everything has a picture on what to do. And that is only for the very first one in this project, which is the little Jesus in the manger. From now on, all of the directions will just be written. There will be no pictures. They're essentially all the same, where they start with the placement and tack down of that main base fabric, and then they go into the details. And it's not quite as easy, of course, than just looking at the pictures, but you'll just have to go step by step on what placement lines it's going to do. And of course, they still give you the color, or if color doesn't matter, this little box that has the lines in it. And then when a color is needed, it still shows the little swatch for the thread. And of course, it will tell you what it's doing. Again, not quite as easy as looking at the pictures, but they're pretty straightforward. All right, so let's start with the placement and the tack down of that base fabric for Mary. It just got done running the placement line for the face and the little hands. And now I need to place the skin fabric. It's going to start with the hands. And so I'm going to place just a little portion of this over that area. I'm going to tack it down, and then when it stops and cuts the thread, I am manually going to stop my machine. I'll just trim that piece off and move this section up to the face. The next 3 steps are going to be also applique. It's going to be the placement and tack down of the tunic, and the placement and tack down of the robe with the felt, and then the placement and tack down of her hair, and I will trim after tacking each of those down. This is the placement line for the robe, and that is with the turquoise felt. So again, I have not cut any of this to size. I just have my whole piece of felt, and I'm just going to place it in the corner, making sure that I cover, and then I'll tack it down. So for the placement for her hair, it's this top portion, this little section above this shoulder, and then all the way down here. So when placing the fabric for the hair, it just needs to make sure to go at least past this and above the top. And they give you plenty of fabric when they have you cut. And now it'll do the tack down, and we'll trim. Now the next several steps are going to be stitching some detail and satin stitching. So it's going to do the eye, her little closed eyes, and then it's going to stitch the tunic, satin, and decorative outline, and that's her white, kind of like her dress. Then it's going to do part of her robe. Then it will go back to do some more skin. I think that might be the other hand. Then it goes back to the robe, another part of the robe, and then it will do the decorative outline for the hair. And then we'll go back to doing a placement line for her scarf and start working on that. So let's get up to that point and do some of those decorative outlining. I just got done stitching the white for the bottom of her dress, her tunic, and the top. And at first I thought that this had messed up because it's not a solid satin outlining. But I think it's because it's supposed to be more like a decorative, kind of a lacier, lighter edge because it's up by her, face. And then also I noticed that there is a jump stitch that I will remove when I'm done. But it looks funny right now, again, like something's missing, but it's just because there's a jump stitch that needs to be removed because that's, I think, supposed to be like her little chin. All right, so now let's move on to doing some more outline. It's going to do part of the robe. Then it'll do back to this little hand and then back to the other side of the robe. Now the last thing it's going to do before we put the back on is her headscarf. And so that's with the last piece of light blue fabric. It's going to do the placement. I'm going to place it, tack it down and trim, and then it will do the decorative outline for a few more details, and then we'll finish up the back. So now I'm ready for the envelope backing. Again, these are the pieces that don't have interfacing. And for these two, I need to iron the short end. They're a little bit longer than they are wide, and so I need to fold over the short end 1/4 of an inch and then fold it over again. You don't really need to measure, just roughly. Fold it over again and iron. And then I will do the same thing for the other side. So it stitched out the 2 placement lines, and that is going to be where the fold of this fabric lines up. This is right side down. Just making sure that you go over all of those lines. They want you to tape over that seam so that the foot doesn't catch and rip it up. I think I might tape up here too. All right, so it's going to tack this half down, and then it's going to add the next placement lines. After tacking that piece down, it ran 2 placement lines. It might be hard to see because I have my lighter thread, but of course I can see it fine in person. Here's one, and the other one is right here. So now I need to take the second piece with the fold up so it's right side down, and I'm going to line it up right along those placement lines. And again, tape. So I'm done with Mary, so I'm going to take this out of the hoop. And I had mentioned that I was going to do the sheep and the donkey, but I think this is all I'm going to do for this video. So I'll take this out. You can see how little I wasted because I was able to hoop this, and I can always press. But this is all going to be trimmed. And so let's go finish these two up. Here are the 2 pieces out of the hoop, and now I need to trim them. And if you flip to the back side, the very first tack down, when it tacked down the base fabric, this outer line is where it needs to be trimmed, not too close to this last stitching line. So I am going to use pinking shears. They do suggest to, after you trim, to notch or to, cut clips in because there's some curves. It says you can use pinking shears. I'm going to try that, and I'll just trim right along this outside. Now the pinking shears honestly really won't do anything because you're not super close. I may come in with just scissors and still go ahead and clip, but I am going to go ahead and just use pinking shears. So maybe where it's curved in, of course, don't cut too close to the stitching. So honestly, I think the pinking shears this far really aren't necessary. I don't think they really do anything. So it looks like that. And then it just needs to be flipped inside out. So cute, that fringe. Now I will go get my turning tool and get everything nice and smooth. All of this needs to be pushed out, but before I do that, so cute, I'm going to do Mary. All right, so let's get her cut out. Now here's the tool that I usually use at my embroidery machine to hold things down when I'm stitching, and this is actually a turning tool. It has not a sharp end, but a more pointed end, and of course a round end. And so I am just going to run it along the seam and get those corners pushed out. So cute. I could use the bigger, rounder end for larger, you know, not open, but larger areas that didn't have as many of the, you know, little spots to turn. But when I use this, I go back and forth between, just depending on what area I'm trying to push out. Those look so good. All right, now it's time to stuff these, and I am going to cut that little jump stitch before I forget. I have this little, I think it's called a side hopper, little pinch scissors. I think they're made for jump stitches. I got it at A1, Vacuum and Sewing. And you just slide it under there and then trim them off. All right, that looks good. I'm ready to finish off the backs. Now you can stitch this close. I think that's what the directions say, is just to whip stitch it. I am just going to try the Heat and Bond Ultra Hold. So this is an iron-on, and it's got a paper backing on one side, and you can feel and see that there's adhesive on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this with the adhesive side up, and I'm going to iron it to the top piece. And I don't need to worry about it attaching to the bottom because there's the paper. And so I just want to make sure that I have it slipped in. And let's see how long this says to do it. It says just for 2 seconds. Then you would peel the paper off and press for 8 seconds. So I'm hoping that I can get an even pressure since I have these stuffed. And I just stuffed them with fiberfill, you know, nothing special. Just didn't stuff them too much, but just so that they're firm. So I'm going to try this and see if I can get a good bond because they're stuffed. And if I can't, then I guess I'll hand stitch them. So I'll probably just do in a few sections. And you can see it does hold. Now, of course, it needs the 8 seconds to get a really good hold. And let's see if I can get this smooth. I'm just going to press that and see. I'm going to let it cool off before I peel the paper. So maybe well, let me try this before I do the other one. So now that that is stuck to this fold, I can take the paper, if I've pressed it good enough, and peel it off. And it doesn't look like I've got it pressed firm enough, at least right there. So I'm going to have to try it a little bit harder to see. Okay, so now I can tell One, because of course there's none of the, it's kind of bumpy, the adhesive when it's on the paper. And if I turn it back, I can see, I'm not sure if you can see, you can tell that it's shining. So I can tell that that adhesive is adhered to the fabric. So I'm just going to pull that paper away. And again, try to get it smooth. I think I'm going to try to do half, and I'm going to try to press firm for about 8 seconds. And then I'm just going to kind of hold that. This is kind of like a clapper. It gets the heat out and keeps it pressed while it's cooling. Okay, I think that looks good. Let's try this side. Okay, so cute. And you can see that that's stuck. All right, so let's do this Tamara. And you can see that when you turn them, this kind of gets, pulled. And so again, when you're pressing the top first piece, it doesn't matter how this lays because there's paper on the back. And so I'm just going to tuck it up under with the adhesive up towards this top piece. I guess you could do it the other way around, but it would, I think, be easier to do this way. And then I'll just do a couple of seconds. And this just adheres it to that top piece. And just make sure that it's tucked in, that it's not coming out so it doesn't get on your iron, the adhesive. And I think I need to press right in that middle. I think I missed those both times. Okay. And again, just start peeling it back to see if you can tell that it's shiny and that there's no adhesive on the paper. And I can tell because this paper has no adhesive, and I can see the shiny adhesive on the fabric. So now with her, again, I'm just going to try to make it as smooth as I can. And I'm going to do it probably in sections. I think what I'm going to do with this is I need some pressure underneath. This seemed to work okay, but I think I'm going to try to roll this towel up. Okay, that seemed to work okay. It's, maybe not the best, but again, I am actually going to be covering this up. And so let me go show you why. Now, the last thing that I'm going to do is I want these to stand so that you can display. I have a cute stable that I'm going to show you at the end, and I want them to, of course, stand upright. And if they are just stuffed, they don't stand. I had seen someone a couple years ago who made this set, used the poly pellets and heat sealed it in a little Ziploc. And so I have a heat sealer and poly pellets. So I tried that, and that did not work for me. I tried, a little, like a little pillow of poly pellets. I tried more, I tried less. That just, it just didn't work. So on Facebook, I saw somebody with these little picture holders or place card holders, and when the back is undone, they just slipped this right up into the back, and then this, would enable these to stand for display. Now that's a great idea, except for, again, these are for some of my younger grandkids, and if I were to leave this open, then I know that stuffing would get pulled out, and I don't want that. And so that's why I decided to close these. And my first thought was I will take some backing fabric, just sew a little square, glue it on 3 sides or sew it on 3 sides. And then that's essentially kind of the same idea. You can slip this little holder when you want to display it, or it can be removed and this can be played with and then, put back. But that I didn't want to have to sit and sew a bunch of these little squares. So I just thought, what if I use felt? So I pulled some felt out, just not that came with this packet, but just some felt that I had. And I have kind of an off-white. It's really not the same color. It's more yellow, but I'm okay with that. So I thought that this would work because I don't have to sew these. I can just cut. I think I'm just going to cut a little square so this slips right into, this would slip up like that. And then I would just glue the 3 sides. And so I think that's what I'm going to do. It's not, the perfect, and you can see it on the back, but, if they're being played with, that's okay. And when they're not, and if they want to display them, then, no one will see those. So I'm going to try that. I'm just going to cut out a square that's, again, big enough for this to slide in and allows me to glue on the side. I also want to mention I did have to get 2 sizes. Most of the little characters will take this taller size, and I'll put these in the description about the sizes. But the baby Jesus, I think the donkey, the sheep, and maybe even the camel. I'm not sure how tall the camel is. He's sitting, and I'm not sure if this, will be short enough for him. So I'm not sure because of course, I haven't stitched him out yet. But I have some of these little smaller ones that would be the perfect size for my smaller pieces. Okay, let's cut these and get them glued on and see how that works. So I think measuring these, if I cut the width about 1.75 inches, maybe a hair under, that would give me enough room to, glue on the side, and then maybe 1.5 inches tall. And I think these are both about the same size. So let me figure out. This is 9 inches. And this way, I think it should be about 12 inches. I think I'm going to cut it this way. I didn't do the math on a calculator to see what would be the best use. I have lots of this color, and so if I cut this, line this up to my 1.75 inches, and then I can just cut these at 1.5 inches, and I think that will be good. Let me get a smaller ruler. So if I do it 1.5 inches this way, and I think that'll be perfect. Enough to put a little bit of glue and a slide in. All right, so let me finish cutting these, and then we'll try these first 2 and see how it works. I was able to get 8 pieces, so I can get all of the ones that I need from this one piece of felt. Now, I think what I'm going to do is just put this down, kind of rest my little person up, center it, and hold it. And I think what I'm going to first do is add that's probably a little too much, add a dot just right in the center and get that center piece. Then I can take that out. And then I can just flip this back and glue the top and the side. Now I have nails, and so I use those as tools. I'm not really supposed to do that. But if you're, of course, be very careful. And then I will just press that. Do the same thing on this side. Hold it on the fold. I guess that'd probably be smart to hold it on the fold, and then it wouldn't have to be right next to the glue. That's much smarter. Okay. Now I'm going to let that dry. It dries pretty fast. So now I have, you can see, again, if I had, something that was right on the color-wise, that would be great, but I'm okay with that. So now this, of course, this is open. Now let's see. So if I stick that up, let me put it over here. Let me put it, make sure. And if I have to bend it back, because he stands, but he's kind of moving a little forward. So I'm going to see if I can bend this so that because he's in an odd angle. So let's see. I mean, he stands, kind of hard to see at this angle, but he kind of leans forward. But I guess if he's at eye level, I'm going to still try to get this bent back so that it's, kind of more at an angle. Let's see if that tilts him a little bit. Oh, that's much better. Now he looks like he's standing more upright. And of course, I'll show you when he's at eye level. Okay, now let's try the tall one because he's a pretty short one. So let's do the same thing and see if this is strong enough to hold her up. And it may have to be where she's angled too. If you look straight down, you can see there's a space because she kind of leans forward, and it might be top heavy. And so we may have to do the same thing with them and kind of all lean these back to kind of offset that. So I'm going to set this up, center it, and then I'm just going to kind of hold this so I know that I can do my first little dot right there at the top. And then I'll flip that and hold that fold so I'm not anywhere near that glue. You could always use just a fabric glue or just like a tacky glue. You would just need to let it, of course, dry. Okay. Fold this side back. Oh, and she stands good. So there she is. And here's baby. Oh, that's so cute. Okay, so I'm really glad that I saw that person, and I don't know who it is, but that was a great idea. And so again, this is, hopefully my grandkids don't yank this off, but I think that's so cute. And I'm really glad it worked because I have probably enough to make 5 sets. I had to get 2 different sizes. Now there was a set that had, I think, 3 or 4 different sizes, and that might work. And I think it's going to be perfect. All right. So here are our first 2. Now that I'm done with my first 2 pieces, let me show you the stable that I found. I bought this at Hobby Lobby. It's wood. It's got cute cutout windows in the back. It's about, I would say, about 9 inches tall. And with Mary, she's this tall, and I think Joseph goes maybe to below this. So it's the perfect size. This was, I believe they called this a medium. So the tag doesn't say medium, but if I remember right, there was a larger one and a smaller one. There were 3 sizes, And so I think that I got the medium size. It is the $17.99. I, of course, did not pay that. I got it, I think, for like 60% off or something like that. I think I paid less than $10. I think it was 9 something. And so, of course, I got 2 of them. So let's go set this up and we will start adding as we stitch out more of our cute little nativity stuffies.